before I even started YouTube. I watched Bailey Sarian, shout out Bailey, even though you unfollowed me on Instagram. What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel and welcome back to another True Crime Sunday. Today we're going to be talking about a case that is probably one of the most suggested cases on my channel to this date, and I think about 5 people within the first hour of me doing last week's case asked me to do this particular case. Not only has this been such a highly requested case recently, but it's actually one that I've been thinking about doing because it's been one of those cases that has stayed on my mind for ever since I heard it. I originally already came to my own conclusion on this case after I heard Danelle Hallen cover this case. This was before I even started YouTube, and then my mind changed when I watched Bailey Sarian. After I did my own research on this case, I came up to a whole bunch of information that so many YouTubers have left out of their video, and that is the reason why my mind has again changed on this case. So I think that this is probably the most researched, the most up-to-date, the most accurate video on the Kendrick Johnson case that there is on YouTube ever to this particular date. So strap yourselves in. We are going to be debunking a whole bunch of theories. It's not going to be one of those Wikipedia read true crime stories. Like, none of my videos are. So strap yourselves in. We're going in on this one. So Kendrick Johnson was an 18-year-old male who attended a high school in, I don't know how to say it, Lowndes. I was right. Lowndes. Okay. So, yeah, thank you, ma'am. You may stop. Okay, so Kendrick Johnson was a 18-year-old male who attended Lowndes High in Georgia. First things first, and I mean absolutely no disrespect to any other true crime YouTuber, especially the ones that I aforementioned in the earlier bit of this video, but usually when true crimers cover this case, they only describe the pictures and they only describe one picture, and that is the reason why so many people believe what they believe on this case. Until I did my own research and saw all of the photos for myself, you're gonna think one particular type of way, and that is because you're not seeing the full picture. So when I did my own research and I saw all of the photos, it was pretty obvious what had happened. So a lot of the true crime YouTubers will have told you about the photo of what he looked like from the feet position. So you've got these huge rolled up mats, wrestling mats. These are like more than 6 foot. They're super heavy. These aren't just your yoga mats. These are like actual wrestling mats. These are heavy. You will struggle to knock them over. So he was found upside down in the hole of the rolled up mat. And so a lot of the true crime YouTubers are explaining this one particular photo where you can see his feet. All the photos were taken from the crime scene where they had knocked over the mat, and they're describing the photo of the feet. And they basically just say that somebody has tossed his shoes in with him in the mat. And straight from there, you have an idea of what you're going to believe before you even get through the rest of the video. So I'm going to do my best while not showing the photos to explain all of the photos in how they are actually representing what was at the scene. You can very well go and have a look at the photos. I will just note here that they are way more horrific than the Kenneka Jenkins case. They are brutal. You will never ever ever unsee these particular photos, which is why I'm going to do my best to describe them to you so you never have to see it. For the last week after seeing the photos, they've just popped up in my head at random times, like just random times. I've seen a couple of dead bodies just on the internet and they have been not nice to see, but this is the first time that I have ever seen a dead body and haven't been able to stop thinking about it for, like, it's been a week since I've seen them. and the image just pops up in my head. The first photo where you can see the tail end of the mat where his feet are sticking up, you can basically just see that his shoes had been kicked off his feet and they've fallen kind of like these are his 2 feet within the mat, and the 2 shoes had fallen just here. Just where the opening is, where there's a little bit of space, because his legs are the thinnest part of his body, and they were being stopped from falling down there obviously by his bottom and his calves. His right arm was kind of like this, and his left arm was reaching out in front of him. So if you're just imagining a roll, somebody has dived in, which means their feet are facing up. His body is facing down, which means his head is here. His left arm, just imagine that I'm upside down right now. His left arm is reaching up and his right arm is just here beside his body. So these mats are 6 feet tall. Again, as I said, they're not like yoga mats. They literally stand up on their own due to the sheer weight of them. These mats were in the school's old gym and they were in permanent storage. And the old gym is somewhere where the kids go to play, where they go to hang out. There's a couple of bleachers in there. The kids used to use these wrestling mats as a way to store their belongings, because this school was one of those schools where they charge students if they want to have a locker. So Kendrick used to share a pair of shoes with his friend, and they used to keep them in this blue mat. And it's really interesting to note that when this was happening was just after they came back from their Christmas break, and then during the Christmas break the school had actually moved way more mats into that corner of the gym, which meant that the mat that Kendrick and his friend used to keep their shoes in was actually in the back corner, and now there were all these new rolls of mats in front of it, so it was a lot less accessible than what it was before they left for Christmas break. All of the other mats were this cream off-white color, whereas the one that Kendrick and his friend used, and probably for this reason, was blue. So it definitely stood out from the rest of the wrestling mats. Kendrick was seen entering the old gym at around 1:27. He had a weightlifting class afterwards and he was presumably going there to get his shoes, but he never came out, and he was also marked absent for his weightlifting class. That night, Kendrick was supposed to attend practice, but he never showed up, and he also never came home after practice. So it would be about midnight when his mother would grow worried and call police. After reporting her son missing, the next day she would go to the school's administration office, and she would tell them that her son was missing. And the admin at the office actually helped her by printing out these color missing person posters for her son. At around 10:30, there would be a group of girls who were in the school's old gym. They were filling out a survey, and one kid looked up and saw socks in a mat, and I guess they were playing on the bleachers and thought it was just some sort of joke, and he went to look into the mat and he saw that someone was in there. So when he saw that there was somebody in the mat, he just assumed that someone may have just fallen in. And so what they did was they pushed over this huge rolled up mat, and when they saw the blood and the vomit that spewed out from the bottom of the mat, that's when they told the teacher. One student called 911 when they realized that the person in the mat needed help, and then when the teacher realized that the person in the mat was actually deceased, they all went into lockdown. All of the students in the school were moved to the new gym, and the entire school went on lockdown. Kendrick had been deceased in this rolled up mat for about 21 hours at this point, and the stages of decomposition had already begun. When police arrived at the scene, the first thing that they did was begin taping the crime scene, as well as taking photos of the scene. I watched the crime scene tape, and when they walked into the old gym, you can see straight away that the rolls of wrestling mat had been knocked down, I guess out of the way of the blue mat, because the blue mat had been knocked down. And in this video, it's basically a walkthrough of the entire crime scene. It does things like zoom in on locks on the door to show where the locks were working. It zooms in on literally every piece of rubbish that was in that corner. It looks like the corner wasn't really cleaned that often, and it looks like this gym wasn't very supervised. There's a bunch of different candy wrappers. There's a whole bunch of Gatorade bottles in that corner, and then when the tape looks around into the different bins and on the walls and things like that, everything seems as normal until the video camera looks into the bottom of the blue mat and you can see his feet, and then it moves forward to the top end of the mat and you can actually see Kendrick's head. And at this point, his arm that was reached out was resting over his face like this, and he was obviously someone had tried to pull his head out of the mat, and so his arm had just rested on his head. From this tape, you can see that it is pretty hard to see that there's actually feet in there, especially because Kendrick was shorter than the mat's height. If it was a really poorly lit area, it would be hard to see that there was actually somebody in this mat. Again, also because he was shorter, because his feet weren't sticking out of the mat. They were definitely in the mat. So that would be my first question, is how did nobody see that there was somebody in this mat earlier? And that's the reason. It's because he was shorter than the mat and he was inside the mat, and also these mats are huge. But my next question would be, how come nobody heard him screaming for help? When I saw what these mats actually look like, it's pretty obvious that anything would be muffled. However, I did find some other students from a different school. They obviously had the same question, and they wanted to do a demonstration to see if you can actually hear anybody calling for help while in this mat. And they also wanted to see whether or not you could knock the mat over if you were stuck inside. I'm going to show you that now, but I will just add in here that there was no classes for the rest of the day, and so nobody was even in the building to hear anybody screaming for help. But for demonstration purposes on what that might have sounded like, and also to show that it is impossible for you to knock the mat over if you're stuck inside of it, here is a demonstration that thankfully kids from a different school decided to film.
Kendrick Johnson, the KJ, he just passed away. He died in, I think, Georgia, Valdosta, Georgia. And he was inside of a mat. A lot of people don't believe it. This is a very short mat. He was in an 8-foot mat, and he reached inside. We're gonna tip him up to demonstrate, and we want to show you guys how it's very difficult to get out of it. And this guy's, he's 6 feet tall, and if he was vertical in a mat, this is what would happen. Go ahead and let's tip him up. Felicia, can you help?
Should I get out first?
Yeah. So we're showing you right now. Go ahead and yell. Yell for help. Yell for help. Can you hear me?
Yell again.
See how nobody would hear that? You say it loud. Nobody can hear him. Wow. Try to get out. Try to get out. Try to knock it down. Try to knock it down. See, he can't. Now let's tip him over. Let's get him out. Crazy, huh?
It's so hot in there.
And can you imagine?
For how long? Like 15, 20 seconds?
Yeah. Hey, in a few hours, blood will pool in your head. You won't be able to survive, and you'll die. And he was found the next day. Oh, that's crazy.
My cousin Ray, next day,
dead.
He's so sweaty. It's so hot in there. Yeah,
you're gross. What? Tell us how it felt. Like you can't move.
It's so you're just scared to be in there. Like I couldn't move or anything.
The investigation went on for about 4 months, and the coroner's office came back with the determination that Kendrick died from positional asphyxiation, which is not the same as me choking you or you getting caught in something and it strangling you. This is actually because he was inverted, so an emphasis on positional asphyxiation. And you basically cannot get enough oxygen in no matter what, because first of all, it's kind of like when somebody is sitting on your chest, he can't breathe. So from his inverted position, he could not get enough oxygen in, especially in such a small enclosed area that had little to no oxygen flow. The investigation's conclusion was that Kendrick jumped up into the mat and when he was in there trying to reach for his shoes, which is why one of his arms was up and one of them was by his side, that he actually couldn't get out of this position. The idea is that the reason his shoes are knocked off is because, not because somebody threw them in there, but because he either panicked and kicked them off, or during the stages of dying, he kicked them off. My next question, and a lot of other people's questions, as I've seen on different forums, are why did he have to go in to the roll? Why couldn't he have just knocked the roll over, gotten his shoes, and then left? There are a couple of different reasons for that. First of all, remember when I said that the landscape for which he was used to had actually changed, because over the Christmas break they had filled up that corner with extra rolls of mats, and so now his mat, his blue mat that he usually stores his shoes in, is now right at the back. It's less accessible, and even if that was the method that he usually used, you can't knock over a mat when there's a whole bunch of heavy mats around it. Also, after just knowing how heavy these mats are, I don't think that that would be a method to just pick up the mat, grab your shoes and leave. I don't think that that would be a method that he would have used anyway, just because they're so heavy. I can only see someone actually trying to lift this mat if they had another person with them, or if, you know, I just don't see that as being a method that he would choose. But even if it was something that he usually did, he wouldn't have been able to do it with all of these other really heavy mats now packed into the corner. But as we know from all of these cases, what the police say and what the coroners say doesn't usually align up to what the public thinks, and sometimes it's actually not what happened. So the most popular theory in the Kendrick Johnson case is that he was murdered, that he was beaten to death by two brothers called the Bell brothers, and I'm not going to put in their first names just for privacy reasons, and at the end you'll understand why. But the idea is that he was beaten by the Bell brothers and stuffed in one of these mats. It's a theory that the family of Kendrick believe. They've asserted it both publicly and legally, and it's also the most popular theory among online sleuths. And also, when I first heard about this case, I believed that too. And the reason that I believed that is because the YouTubers that I was watching were saying that when he was put into the mat and when he was found in the mat, that both of his arms were by his side and he was upside down. But that is false information. He was actually reaching for his shoe. He wasn't stuffed in there, both arms by his side. So he did actually have an intention by going into that mat. And so that is another huge reason as to why I believed one thing, and then when I did my research and got the actual facts, I believed another thing. But his positioning isn't the only thing that I'm going to consider in this evidence, because there is so much in this case. The next thing I'm going to talk about is another photo, but not the photo that we were mentioning earlier. This next photo is probably one of the most horrific that I've seen from this case, and this photo was published to Facebook by Kendrick's father. I'm also going to be contrasting this with the photo that I saw from the actual crime scene of what he looked like when he came out of the mat. So the photo from the crime scene when he had just come out of the mat was a photo where he was laying on his back. His arm that was originally by his side was resting on his chest, and the arm that was reaching is still in that reaching position. However, he is laying down. This arm, probably due to restriction of blood flow, his hands, they look like they're starting to crumple up, and that's probably from decomposition, but they also look like they have almost been like chopped off. But obviously they weren't chopped off. They're just doing what dying bodies do. The thing that will bring in a lot of evidence from this photo is the blood. He had blood like all over his arm that was reaching. There was blood like in his eyes. There was blood on his forehead. There was blood around the shoe, but interestingly, the shoe that he was reaching for didn't have blood inside of it or on top of it. It was only pooled underneath it. And this flagged questions for me. First of all, if he died from asphyxiation, why was there blood in the first place? And second of all, why was there not blood on top of the shoe? And that is also another thing that people bring up and say, well, why is there blood if he died from asphyxiation? And why is there blood pooling under the shoe? There's actually an extremely logical explanation for this. And the first one is that it's actually not all blood. So the blood that you see coming from his eyes, his nose, and his mouth is actually bodily fluids mixed with blood. And this is what they call purge fluid. So when you die, especially when you're in inverted position, you will have purge fluid, and it comes from every orifice from the body, your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. And this explains why there is no blood from here down. There was absolutely no blood on any part of his body apart from his eyes, his nose, and his mouth, which ultimately ran down his arm and then dripped onto the floor and pooled underneath the shoe. But why wasn't it on top of the shoe or in the shoe? This is explained by the positioning of where he actually landed within the hole of the mat. His shoes were like in a corner and his head had landed right next to the shoe. His arm was like this. So he had landed in the hole with his arm first and then his head landing there. And the shoe was here, which meant that any blood which had dripped down onto the floor had pooled around the shoe, not into the shoe, because he wasn't directly in front of the shoe. He was to the side of the shoe. And another thing that shows that this isn't pure blood from any sort of cut, any sort of beating, is that the blood that you see in the photos is not this thick black red color. It's a really light red color. And another thing is that when you're upside down, all of the capillaries in your eyes, they start to burst one by one, which causes extra bleeding. And an interesting thing about the murder theory that he was beaten and put into the mat is that if he was beaten outside of the mat and then placed in the mat, there would have been blood everywhere. There would have been blood below this part of the body. There would have been blood in and on top of the shoe. But because there was no blood anywhere apart from, you know, his eyes, his nose, his mouth, and the arm that was reaching, it shows that he wasn't bleeding before he went into the mat. Because if you went into the mat and you were already bleeding, there would also be smears up the mat from when your body contacted it on its way down. So now let's talk about this famous horrific photo of Kendrick that his father had posted to Facebook. This is the scariest, most horrific photo I've ever seen in my lifetime, and it was posted to Facebook. His father posted it saying that this is what he looked like when he came out of the mat. This photo literally looks like the face has been displaced. It was placed next to a photo of what Kendrick looked like alive, which was a huge contrast. And the father posted it saying that his son was beaten and this was a murder. This photo was very deceiving because this photo was actually taken after the autopsy. The reason this picture of Kendrick's head looks so disfigured and so it literally looks like a face, like the skin of the face has just been plopped on a head. And the reason for that is because this was a post-autopsy photo. This was after they had peeled the skin back from the face and separated it from the muscles so that they could do the autopsy. And then obviously they brought the face back down, but it doesn't fit. The face is all, it's not great. However, his father took a picture of his son this way and put it next to a photo of what he looked like when his face was in position, and told his Facebook and told this crazy viral page that, hey, my son was beaten. This is what he looked like when he came out of the mat. But this is not what he looked like when he came out of the mat. I've seen photos of when he came out of the mat and he looks basically how he looked in life. The photo that was posted is not what he looked like when he came out of the mat. That photo was after they peeled his face back for the autopsy. This is another reason why people believe that Kendrick was beaten and stuffed into the mat. This is the reason that I believed it also. Because it is so easy to believe that when you don't have context for a photo and when someone is giving you an incorrect context for the photo, especially when they place it side by side with a happy, amazing young man next to what his face looked like when it was peeled off. So the family, by this point, have made it very, very clear that they're accusing the Bell brothers. So who are the Bell brothers and what happened? So they're accusing the Bell brothers because about a year and a half before Kendrick was found, he got into a little fight on a bus. They were coming home from a game and one of the Bell brothers was friends with Kendrick. They started telling your mama jokes. Now, if you remember your mama jokes, it's something like, your mama's so fat she could, something, you know what I'm saying? You know what your mama jokes are. They were having a little back and forth about jokes and Kendrick outwitted one of these brothers. And so the Bell brother got angry and tried to put Kendrick in a headlock, but soon after they reconciled. Remember that this happened about a year and a half before Kendrick was found. But Kendrick's father told the media what had happened with the Bell brothers and that this is the reason why he believes that the Bell brothers beat Kendrick and stuffed him in the mat. Another thing that Kendrick's father told the media was that this your mama joke incident happened shortly before Kendrick was found, when in reality, this happened about a year and a half before. Another interesting thing about the Bell brothers is something that has probably created this conspiracy, and it is something that really didn't help in their favor, was that they are the sons of Rick Bell, who worked for the FBI. So the Bell brothers, they actually have an alibi. One of the brothers was in class, accounted for in class, and then the other one was actually going to a wrestling tournament. But there is some discrepancies in this alibi. So the Johnson family filed a $100 million lawsuit against these two children, the Bell brothers, and also against the police and the school. And in this $100 million lawsuit, the Johnsons provided a logbook for that morning, for that day. And it said that the wrestling tournament didn't actually set off to leave until 4 p.m., which would mean that one of the Bell brothers couldn't be accounted for. But this actually wasn't the official travelogue. This was a slip that was filled out by the coach months before this actually happened, and the coach didn't know what time the bus service would need them to leave, because this was a wrestling tournament that was pretty far away. And because the coach didn't know what time the bus company needed them to leave, the coach simply put down the time that the tournament was meaning to start at, which was 4 p.m. The log didn't include the leaving time because the coach didn't know what time they were going to leave. And so that's why the coach put down the time of 4 p.m, knowing that the bus company would tell them a little bit before the event what time they needed to be ready to go. Hence, the log was not admissible because it was simply an administration mistake on behalf of the coach. So the event started at 4 p.m, which meant that the kids needed to leave at around 12. The Bell brother was accounted for by his coach, by his teachers, and by the other kids on the bus, as well as the weigh-in documents and as well as the rival team. But this didn't stop web sleuths from taking matters into their own hands. People believed that the Bell brothers did this, regardless of what the evidence said and regardless of the fact that they had an alibi. One of the Bell brothers was in line to receive a scholarship to attend university. But because online sleuths decided to take matters into their own hands, they started writing into the university. And all of this unwanted attention meant that this boy lost his scholarship. And another thing that shows that the Bell brothers were actually friends with Kendrick, that they had reconciled over the past year and a half since that Yo Mama incident, was that Kendrick and one of the Bell brothers decided to work together on a science project, not because they were paired together, but because they wanted to work together and chose each other as their partner. So the next theory, it ties into the police cover-up, but also ties into another theory that seems to keep popping up on my channel, and that is organ trafficking. So the person who started this theory was Kenneth, who is Kendrick's dad. He said that when he went to go and identify his son's body, that the storage drawer was heated. He then went and did interviews saying that the police and the coroner's office were purposefully heating his son's corpse. And when the family received Kendrick's body back, they said that the body was filled with newspaper and the organs were missing. So the first part of this theory was actually investigated. The drawers which hold dead bodies have an alarm system which will sound if any of the drawers rise above a certain temperature. So the drawers were investigated as well as the alarm system to make sure that it would sound if the temperature does rise above the appropriate level, and there was nothing wrong with any of the drawers. Additionally, the funeral home who received Kendrick's body said that they weren't given any organs, but the police said that once they took samples from the organs for the autopsy, they sent it back in bags along with the body. It would be later that the funeral home would backtrack in the media and say that they were actually given the organs, but they had to dispose of them because they couldn't be used. They were too decomposed. Additionally, the funeral home were providing this service nearly for free, hence why they used newspaper. Using newspaper instead of cotton to fill the body's empty cavities is actually something that they used to do way back when. It's not anything new, it's not anything that would disrupt the body at all. It's just something that the funeral home used to cut costs. But this didn't stop the family from trying to sue the funeral home as well. But because there were no laws broken, they didn't really get anywhere with that. So in terms of this organ trafficking theory, I think it's really easy to debunk this. First of all, if you're trying to sell organs on the black market, everyone knows that you need to keep organs cold, not hot. Second of all, if the police have already taken samples from the organs, which just FYI are still in storage, then the organs are useless. And on top of that, if a body has been dead for the amount of time that Kendrick's body was dead, before the police even got to the scene, you cannot put those organs in somebody else's body because they're already dead. So you can't use heated, chopped up organs that have been dead for basically a week, maybe over a week now, and put them in someone else's body. That theory doesn't work. The next piece of evidence that we're going to be talking about are the surveillance tapes.
Well, Anderson, the Johnsons were hoping that this video would give them some answers. There was even a hashtag on Twitter, "Give us the tapes." But it appears that this video is only providing more questions and very few answers. We've got a couple of clips from these hours of video we've watched. Let's look at the first one, and it shows Kendrick walking in from the right side of your screen there. He's behind another student, and as soon as he runs out, you see that student disappears, and a couple of other students appear. It's from one image to the next with no explanation of how those students got to that position or where the student at that red shirt went. Now, we blurred their faces because they're minors in this video and the next. Let's go to the next one. You can see Kendrick at the bottom right of the screen. He's walking at first, and then he runs out of the frame, and just like the first video, other students just appear. No explanation of how they got to that point. You don't see them walk in. We've not edited these videos to just kind of put one image next to the other. This is how we received them from the sheriff's office today.
So the video seems to be jumping around. You're saying those aren't edits? Is that, I mean, I assume it's a motion sensor camera. Is that the way it's supposed to work, that it may take a few seconds for an image to register?
That was our first question. When we see the images, especially of Kendrick with all these hours of video, it's like, well, what happened at the end of this and how did these students appear? Was this video edited? So we reached out to both the school that owns the cameras that recorded it and then the sheriff's office, which had a copy of it, which supplied it to us. I want to read you the statements. First, from the school district, an attorney for Lowndes County Schools says simply, what we produced to the sheriff is a raw feed with no edits. And then from the attorney for the sheriff's office, my client has confirmed that the video was not altered or edited by anyone within the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office. They both maintain that what we see is exactly what was recorded.
What about the corner where the gym mats are, or where Kendrick's body was ultimately found? I mean, that seems to be the key place. We've known there was a camera there. You saw the video from that camera today. What did you see?
Yeah, this is the most important camera of all 36, and I want to show you the video. It's blurry. Of all 36 cameras, a video that was provided, this angle is blurry. It's almost impossible to make out any of the faces. And if you look at the corner, it's the top left of the image. Those are the mats in which Kendrick Johnson was found. What you don't see is the top of the mats. And we know why that's important, because sheriff's deputies say that he climbed in through the top of the mat. They say that the students who found him were playing on top of those mats. And in this video, because you can't see that image, you can't see that. Also, we saw from one image to the next in the other videos, from looking at this, we see students playing basketball, and then a few frames later, we see what appears to possibly be the nurse running in. Then we see someone running through with a gurney. So there is, we know from the file, of the investigative file, there are activities and there are events between these, but we just don't see them through what is the only blurry image, the blurry angle of all 36 cameras that were provided by the school district and the sheriff's office.
So I'm a little confused. I mean, we saw Kendrick running, and from one angle, the camera on the mat, does that show him approaching the mats at any time? And is there anybody else that shows up?
There is activity in the hours of video there, but it's so blurry and so much is happening in that corner. There are bleachers there, and students, we know from the file, would sit in that area. The police say that they would play in that area, but because we can't see the top of the mats from the image, we can't tell if anyone ever went on top and when they went on top, and we don't see Kendrick running in that direction. And if we were to see someone going in that direction, the image is so blurry. We have not edited this at all, the clarity of it, to tell if Kendrick is running in the direction of the mat.
Even here, we can see the media questioning whether or not these tapes have been altered, doctored, edited. What? Where did those random kids come from? Why are there random kids appearing? Why is the footage so blurry? And why is it so choppy? There are 59 separate cameras on that school grounds, and only 3 of them showed any footage of Kendrick, and all of the 59 cameras send all of its footage to one server. But there are issues with the camera's timestamps. The 59 cameras that send their footage to the server have different times to the actual server. The server cannot magically sync up all of the timestamps of every piece of footage, especially because the internal clock for every individual camera is different, and there can be a maximum discrepancy of up to half an hour. Just to explain this a little bit better, because it took me a while to understand what was happening, say the time is 3 p.m. You've got camera A, whose internal clock is saying that it is 3:03. You've got camera B, whose internal clock believes that it is 3:10. And then you've got camera C, whose internal clock believes that it is 3:15. But in reality, we know that the time is 3 o'clock. That is what's happening with these 59 different cameras with these different internal clocks that are all being sent to the school's one server. Kendrick was seen entering the hallway leading to the gym at 1:27 p.m. Now, we know that this is the most reliable timestamp because his last class finished at 1:25. From when he entered that gym, the rest of the cameras within the gym all have different internal clocks, which are saying different times, and that is where the discrepancy comes from. The internal clock for the gym cameras is off by about 20 minutes. But all of the cameras were checked to see if any of them picked up Kendrick actually leaving the gym, but there was no such footage. Kendrick had a weightlifting class after he entered the gym, which is why we're assuming he's going in there to pick up his shoes. He was marked absent for his weightlifting class. So how do we explain the kids randomly appearing and randomly vanishing from these clips? Those kids actually do us a favor because the cameras that we know that are reliable timestamps actually pick up the vanishing kids leaving. And those are the kids that are seen in the frame after Kendrick leaves the frame. So that actually helps us in piecing together the timeline. And it also explains why the kids just randomly vanished. But there's also another explanation for that. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the Johnsons' access to this footage. So if you are aware of this case, you might remember the movement that was hand over the tapes. That was a movement that was started by the Johnson family. So the public were hearing that the Johnsons were not getting access to the video footage from that day. But what the public didn't know is that the Johnson family was invited to watch the footage several times. They just never did. And the Johnson family, in the public's eye, were demanding that the school hand over the footage. They were demanding that the school make this footage public. But there are laws stating that the school cannot do that. There are minors in this footage, as we know, and they cannot publicize minors without consent. And so the school, as well as the school's attorney, as well as the police force and the district attorney, said to the family to file an open records release so that they could actually release this footage legally. The family never did. But because the family kept this movement going, saying hand over the tapes, publicize the tapes, the school became that distressed that they filed that motion on their own. And because the school was so distressed and filed that motion on their own, the judge actually approved it and the school publicized the tape. And it was put all over the news, and that is how we have access to them today. But even though it was the school who did that, the Johnson family actually took credit for that. So the Johnson family ended their hand over the tapes movement and then took credit for the motion that the school filed. But let's get back to the choppy video. Why is it so choppy? Why do the kids vanish and why do other kids appear? Is there time missing from this footage? What's the go? This is where we actually find out through research that the surveillance and the security system that the school has, these 59 cameras, are not video recording cameras. They are still shot captures. So we have been calling them surveillance tapes. They are still surveillance tapes, but people automatically assume that that means video. It doesn't. These are not video. It's referred to still image capturing. This is when the cameras will take a sequence of photos when it detects motion. Additionally, these cameras take pictures in blocks, and it's dependent on how much movement it senses. So just because there is some movement, it doesn't automatically sequence this block of photos. It doesn't automatically mean it's going to start taking photos. So if there is a student exiting a frame and the student is super far away, that's not enough motion for it to continue taking photos. But if there is someone who is close to the camera and there's a lot of movement, it's going to keep taking photos. Students are fast, students are walking fast, they're jumping, they're playing, and because they're leaving the frame, the cameras are not continuing to take photos. But when kids enter the frame, that is when it will take a photo. Another piece of evidence that we're going to talk about is blood splatter, the bloody tissues that were found in the girls' bathroom, and also claims that the gym was trashed and that his books were everywhere. First of all, the blood splatter was tested and it was found to not be Kendrick's. Second of all, the blood in the bathroom was actually found to be one girl who had hit her face, and that was tested, it was confirmed. And just in terms of this blood splatter and bloody tissue evidence, there are so many reports out there saying that nobody ever tested it. It was tested, it's just not part of evidence. And then the other thing with the books being strewn about, you can actually see in the crime scene video that they're not strewn about. They're simply in the area that he was, in the mat. And we know that there were a whole bunch of students in there that day, and so maybe someone picked up the book and was like, that's not my book, and then they just like threw it back on the floor, because that's something that I would have done if I were in high school. And also, it doesn't actually look like anybody's trashed the place. It just looks like the book is just on the floor. So the Johnson family at this point are still pushing for their $100 million lawsuit against these two young boys, as well as the school and the police force. And so because the police's coroner did not support their claim that it was murder, they decided to do 2 separate additional autopsies that were done privately. Now, the findings in these 2 autopsy reports are another reason why a lot of people think it was murder, that it was blunt force trauma to the neck that killed Kendrick. And it was simply because there was a 2-centimeter bruise on his neck. 2-centimeter bruise. The next piece of evidence comes again from Kendrick's dad, Kenneth, saying that the opening for the mat was too small and his son's shoulders were too broad for him to have fitted in the mat. There are so many things that I can use to debunk this. First of all, the fact that he was in the mat in the first place. But second of all, is when you roll up a mat, it doesn't have a set diameter that it sits at. First of all, because there are going to be a whole bunch of different people who roll mats different ways. And second of all, because the wrestling mats are soft when you push them, and they also expand after they are pushed down. So anybody can roll up a mat and it's going to sit at different diameters. But we don't even need to think about the math, because we've seen that Kendrick was in the mat. There are crime scene photos, and there's also a video from when the police first walked in there. And also, I'm just going to note with my own bit of commentary here, that if they are asserting that these 2 little boys killed their son, and they're saying that they somehow lifted Kendrick and put him into a ginormous mat while he was dead, that just seems like a whole bunch of effort that is kind of close to impossible. And it is more reasonable that Kendrick just jumped up onto the mat and tried to get in there. I think that it would probably be a lot harder to try and stuff a dead weight, limp body into a mat that is so heavy, so tall, and it just does not, like, yeah. But still, the Johnson family used this to accompany their $100 million lawsuit. And in this lawsuit was where it was actually revealed that Kenneth, Kendrick's father, knowingly posted that photo to Facebook and deceived the public in saying that this is what he looked like, that he was beaten, without actually telling people that, hey, no, this is what happens when you peel a face back. And so that is where it was revealed that that's not the context of the photo, that he posted the context of the photo deceivingly. There is a whole extra aspect to this case involving donations and money and reward money that I'm not even going to go into, because I want to focus on what happened to Kendrick. And I think that Kendrick has been very lost in this case. For me, before I researched this case, I came into it thinking that Kendrick was murdered, that he was beaten and he was murdered and he was put in there and someone just threw his shoes in there with him. But like every single case that I do, I think it is so much more important to get the truth rather than entertaining conspiracy theories. And like with last week's case, we know that conspiracy theories do exist, and we know that there are such things as cover-ups, just not in this case. The Johnsons' $100 million lawsuit was thrown out, and the judge actually did note that the Johnson family fabricated evidence to support their $100 million claim. The judge then ordered them to pay the Bell brothers as well as the police department as well as this school a sum of just under $300,000. But no amount of money can make up for the turmoil that has been left after this case. One boy's hope for university has been absolutely destroyed because of how people pick things up on the internet without context. And on top of that, a young man's life has been lost, and instead of honoring his memory and instead of honoring his life, Kendrick's story is now to do with conspiracies and money and donation money and like a whole bunch of really yucky stuff that has happened in the aftermath of his death. And on top of this, I think it is really important to note, even though I'm not going to be talking about what happened to the donation money, I do want to say that one of the family's investigators, when they found out that the family had been lying to them, actually resigned out of pure disgust. I think this case really shows how lives can actually be destroyed when you don't know the full story and when people do things out of context in a way to manipulate the public. It is so much more important to have the truth, and I know that conspiracies and cover-ups are so alluring, but there are real cover-ups and there are real conspiracies out there. This just isn't one of them. I genuinely believe that Kendrick came in after Christmas break and he needed to get his shoes that he had in his mat, and because they'd filled up that corner where he usually just gets his shoes from the mat with all of these other heavy duty mats, that he jumped into the mat and realized that he couldn't get out. The reason his sneakers were kicked off is because he was shorter than the mat, and that is where they fell. I do not know what to believe about Kendrick's family. I want to see the best in everyone, and I don't want to believe that someone would be that desperate for money to be doing all of these things. I hope that there is an extra side to this story apart from the fact. I want to just believe that they are just so grief-stricken that they want to believe all of these things, but there are so many instances where they have directly manipulated evidence and directly manipulated the public in order to get money, and it is really, really sad because Kendrick looked like a very promising, beautiful young boy. And I especially feel for Kendrick's friends, including the Bell brothers, because they were friends. They have experienced a lot. I dare say that losing a scholarship was not the only thing that the Bell brothers had to go through during this whole ordeal. And it is pretty obvious with the state of where this case sits that there are a lot of people that believe that the Bell brothers killed Kendrick. But when you put in all of this work and you actually look at it logistically and properly and you put all of the information together in context, these boys didn't have anything to do with Kendrick's murder, and it was just a freak accident. Unfortunately, Kendrick's case is being focused on conspiracies and money rather than who Kendrick actually was. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you do appreciate that I'm not turning this into a conspiracy case and that I'm giving you all of the facts, the most up-to-date facts and the most accurate story on what actually happened. And I hope you're not disappointed that this didn't turn into a conspiracy or a cover-up case. I have plenty of other conspiracy videos on this channel. I do a true crime case every single Sunday, so feel free to have a look through those, but this is a freak accident and it is a horrific accident. Even the aftermath has been horrific. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help. I had a commenter the other day say that I don't put enough emphasis on telling people to subscribe and that I need to be more pushy about that. So please subscribe. If you want to subscribe, please do. I don't know how to be more pushy with that, but you know how to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.